Amen. Good morning, church family. It's sweet to worship the Lord with you this morning. If you happen to be new with us this morning, welcome. My name is Nick Lees, and I have the privilege of studying God's Word with you. And today we are in week 4 of a series called Biblical Roles, God's Good Design. The first 2 weeks of this series, we focused on men and God's good design for men, as well as God's plan for men. And then last week, we got into God's good design for women, and we saw what he has for you as ladies in Genesis 1 and 2. Today, we're broadening our focus by looking at God's plan for women, by looking at how God calls you to relate not only to him, but also to others in the variety of roles that you may inhabit in your lifetime. So go ahead and get your Bibles. I'll call our ushers forward with Bibles. If you need a copy of the Scriptures, just throw your hand in the air. They'll give you a copy of the Bible this morning. And you're going to want to turn to the New Testament, to the book of Matthew, chapter 22. Now, similar to when we did this for the men a few weeks ago, we're going to be moving through a variety of passages this morning. And if you're like, whoa, that's too much for me to keep up with in my Bible, they will be on the screen behind me so you can read them and follow along there. Don't worry about that. If you were with us last week, I shared about a book that had been very impactful to me as I was preparing for these sermons, specifically the ones for the ladies. And the name of that book, I want to bring it before you again, is Eve in Exile by Rebecca Merkel. And I just want to let you know that today I've sprinkled some of the quotes from that book that have impacted me throughout the message. And I have one, in fact, for us just to get started this morning. And here it is. Design matters. The intent of the designer matters. And we as women, as God's creatures, are designed by him to fulfill a particular role. How many women are out there living frustrated, impossible lives because they're trying to be a can opener when God actually made them to be a knife? So what are we designed to be? What are the problems for which we are the solutions? To even ask that question is to part company with the trend of current thought and historic feminism. Because, of course, in a godless universe, we weren't designed for anything. And if God designed women for a specific purpose, if there are fixed limits on the feminine nature, then surely it would follow that when we are living in accordance with those limits and purpose, we will be in our sweet spot. That's where we'll shine, where we'll excel, where we will find the most fulfillment. Now, I don't know what kind of posture you're bringing into our time in God's Word this morning towards this particular topic. But my hope is, and my prayer is, that whether you're male or female, Lord, that we would come here and we say, Lord, we want to hear what you have to say from your word, that we agree, kind of where the premise is here that Rebecca's laying out, that God's plan for women is good, that it's marvelous, and that if we live by it, women will shine and excel and be fulfilled, and God will be glorified. Her book makes the case for the beauty of God's design, just like we heard last week from Genesis 1 and 2. And just like when we studied this particular topic 2 weeks ago for the men, the structure for our sermon today is going to be informed by Jesus' interactions with the religious leaders of his day in Matthew 22. So hopefully you've turned there, and if you haven't yet, that's page 483 of the Blue Bibles, and you're going to want to turn to Matthew 22, and I'm just going to, again, set the context for this passage and interaction. So the religious leaders of Jesus' day are not his fans to the least, right? They want to get rid of him. They want him out of the picture. They don't like his teaching. They don't like how he's opposing them. And so they're trying to trap Jesus. They're trying to find a way for him to be removed from the scene. So in this particular chapter, first they try to trap him by talking to him about taxes. And they're hoping that he'll say something that will get him in trouble with the Romans. That doesn't happen. Well, then they try to trick him with a theology question. They ask him about the resurrection. But in his answer, he answers their question, and then it actually backfires on them because he then points out that they don't really know the Scriptures at all. Kind of humiliates them in the process. But they're not done yet. They didn't give up after that. So now we're going to read and see that they're going to try a third time to try to trap Jesus. And so that's what we're going to read about in verses 34 through 40. So turn your attention there and let's read together. Matthew 22, starting in verse 34, says, "But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. 'Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?' And he said to him, 'You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. So, the Pharisees are trying to trap Jesus. They're trying to pose this question that they thought was so tough. This would have been one they debated about often. How do you summarize the law? What's the biggest and greatest commandment? And Jesus has an answer for them. And his answer points them back to the Old Testament. He references two specific passages. The first is Deuteronomy 6:5. Let me take you there. Right? And it's going to sound very familiar. God says in Deuteronomy 6:5, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Okay, we heard that with Jesus' answer. Then Jesus also quotes from Leviticus 19, verse 18, which says, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. So Jesus, in his answer to the Pharisees, is emphasizing that this love for God with all of your being, that's first and foremost, but tied intrinsically to that is a second command that's just as important, that you love your neighbor as yourself. Right? Those two go hand in hand. You can't love God without loving your neighbor. And you can't love your neighbor if you don't know and love God. These two commands are what drive all of the scriptures. That's what Jesus is telling the Pharisees. So that is going to be our understanding. That's our baseline now, for which we then dig into the specifics of God's plan for women. And if you notice on the bulletin today, our goal is to embrace the beauty of God's good plan for women. So just like the previous 3 weeks in this series, it's not about just accumulating head knowledge. This is about being able to get to the point where we agree with God and we say, God, your plan is very good. So let's look at it. Here's our starting point. Love God with all your being. That's where it starts, ladies. Love God with all your being. Without love for the Lord, everything else in life becomes an exercise in futility. And this particular aspect of biblical womanhood, to love God with all that you've got, then boils down into two questions. Why should I love God with all of my being? And how do I love God with all of my being? So let's start with the first question. Why should I love God with all of my being? And we have to first answer that because of who he is, right? His identity. That he is your creator. He's the source of your life. King David would pen the following in Psalm 139, verses 13 and 14. Speaking about God, for you, God, formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. So, ladies, to put it very simply, God made you. You are here this morning drawing breath because of the God who designed you. It's his will for you to be here. And he delighted to make you. For that, he's worthy of your love. But that's not the only reason to love him. Let's look at the prophet Isaiah as he speaks for God. So God is speaking through the prophet Isaiah. In Isaiah 40, verses 25 and 26, we read, to whom then will you compare me, that I should be like him, says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes on high and see. Who created these? He who brings out their hosts by number, calling them all by name, by the greatness of his might. And because he is strong in power, not one of them is missing. The point of Isaiah 40 is that our God is an incomparable God. No one else has created the universe and upholds the universe and has designed the universe. He alone has done it. So, ladies, not only is God your personal creator, he is the creator of all things. And if that wasn't enough, think about this. God's not only the source of your life, he's not only the source of the entire universe, he's the source of all that's true and all that's right and all that's good. And in fact, we hear that he's the source of every good thing that you've ever experienced in your life. The Apostle James would say this about God in James 1, 17 and 18. He says, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. And I said this with the men 2 weeks ago. Is it just some good gifts that are from above? And the answer is no. It's every good gift, every perfect gift, every good thing that you have ever experienced in your life finds its origin in your Creator. God gave that to you. All that you have and all that you are because of God's character and His kindness extended to you. You exist and you have the blessings you do because God is intimately involved in your life. So He's incredibly worthy of your worship. He's incredibly worthy of your love. So you should love God with all of your being because of who He is, but also because of what He's done. Right? You should love Him as an appropriate response to His initiatory love. Listen to what the Apostle John says in 1 John 4:19. He says, we love because He first loved us. Well, how has He loved us? We've already said a few things, right? He's made us. He's given us every good gift, which, as we study the pages of Scripture, we understand also includes His own Son to rescue and redeem us from our sin. We've talked about Romans 3:23 every week of this series for a reason. Right? It wipes out our ability to say, I'm good in and of myself. Right? Listen to Romans 3:23. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. When you read that passage, there's really not a whole lot of hope in that little snippet. Right? We have all sinned. We've all fallen short. But Paul doesn't stop there. Let's read Romans 5, 8, and 9. Listen to the progression of hope that's found in this part. But God shows His love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since, therefore, we have now been justified or declared righteous by His blood, much more shall we be saved by Him from the wrath of God. So we went from having no hope, being dead in our sin outside of faith in Christ, to having every possible hope through Christ and through our faith in Him, that we are forgiven, that we're redeemed, that we're made new, that we're no longer condemned. There's no wrath for those who are trusting in Christ. The Apostle Paul would later apply all of that to himself when he's writing to his disciple Timothy. In 1 Timothy 1, Paul writes, the saying is trustworthy and deserving of full acceptance. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the foremost. But I received mercy for this reason, that in me, as the foremost, Jesus Christ might display His perfect patience, as an example to those who were to believe in Him for eternal life. To the King of the ages, immortal, invisible, the only God, be honor and glory forever and ever. Amen. Paul gets it, right? He's not trying to make excuses as if somehow he was a pretty good person who just needed a little bit of help in order to make it to heaven. No, Paul isn't hiding behind any of that. He says, I am the chief of sinners. But Jesus came for me. He rescued and redeemed me. He made a way for me. And in doing this, Jesus is incredibly merciful. He's showing love to one who doesn't deserve it. And He's incredibly patient, right? You know the story of Paul if you've read the New Testament. He was a man who had done some very terrible things. But let's not forget, so have I. And so have you. Jesus Christ came to redeem sinners. And God gets all the glory for His incredible love. So ladies, is this forgiveness from God through Jesus Christ personal and precious to you? Do you understand that you are the chief of sinners? Have you recognized your need for Jesus to save you? It's an incredibly humbling thing to realize that the Son of God came down, humbled Himself to the point of death on a cross, to die in your place so that you could be rescued and redeemed, so that you might have the hope of eternal life, to be adopted as a daughter of God. That kind of radical, generous love transforms a woman. He is worthy of your wholehearted, whole-souled, whole-bodied adoration and love. And we would argue, right, there's no other object in the universe more worthy of your love and worship than God and him alone. So that's the why. But then that brings us to the question of, well, how? How do I love God in this way? We again looked at the Apostle John. In 1 John 5, verse 3, he says, "For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. And his commandments are not burdensome." So at the very least, we're being told that loving God looks like obeying God. And as we said with the men, this is not some sort of begrudging, like, oh, I guess I have to do this, so here we go. I'm gonna do what God calls me to do. No, it's a joyful response to the Lord, because as John says, his commandments are not burdensome. They're a delight for us. They're for my good, for your good, and for God's glory. But the commands of God are intended to provide life. They are the way of wisdom that leads to righteousness and to a holy life, the fruit of which is sweet. It's good. It's enjoyable. It's the consistent refrain of the Scriptures that God's way leads to life. We read in Psalm 16 that at his right hand are pleasures forevermore. In his presence is fullness of joy. So ladies, it is good and right for you to love God by obeying God. Another component of loving God is putting him first. That's something universally that we struggle with as the human race, is putting other things before our Creator. That's why in the Big Ten, the Ten Commandments, it's the first thing. You shall have no other gods before me. That's always been our challenge as a human race, is we put something, or we're tempted to put something before our Creator. Whether that's like the physical idols that they had back in the ancient Near East, or something a little more nebulous like the approval of man, or the desire for pleasure or power. Those are all things that we can put before our Creator. We forsake the love of God by loving something else or someone else first and most. And Jesus highlights this particular struggle in his Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew chapter 6, he warns the people about where they store up their treasures. And he says, don't store them up on earth, right, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves can break in and steal, but rather store up your treasures in heaven. And ultimately, it's not just because the things of this earth are temporary and fleeting. There's a more serious problem that comes from putting our treasures in this life. In Matthew 6:24, Jesus says this, "No one can serve two masters. For he either will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." So if we put anything else before God, if we love that more than God, if we serve that more than God, right, we're putting that in God's place. That thing or that person has now become our God. Which is why the greatest commandment is to love God with all of your being, your heart, your soul, your mind, and strength. Everything that you have. So ladies, what would that look like for you? To love God with all of your being. For God to be the first and foremost priority in your life above everything else and everyone else. At the very least, it's going to look like joyfully obeying him, right? We've heard that. It's also going to look like giving him the best of your time, your talents, your treasures. But what would that look like this week, lived out in your life, right? Each of you is unique. God has designed you in a particular way. Your life situation is not like the one next to you. How will you put God first in your life this week? I would encourage you to wrestle with that, to think through the specifics. God, how do I put you first and not other things this week? Now, one of the most tangible ways that love for God plays out is just like Jesus told us it would in Matthew 22, verse 39. That we would love our neighbor as ourselves. So that's our second opportunity to embrace God's good plan for women. Love your neighbor as yourself. Ladies, this is your calling. This is what you have been designed to do. Love your neighbor as yourself. And what we're going to do now is we're going to consider the various ways that might play out in the roles that you might inhabit in this lifetime. Now, there's a variety of roles, just like we did with the men. You may not be called to each of these during your life, but we're still going to try to run the gamut here. What does it look like to love your neighbor in these roles? And so we're going to start with the spouse relationship. So talking about woman as a wife, loving your neighbor who is your husband. How does God call you to do that in the pages of Scripture? And we're going to turn to Ephesians 5, verses 22 through 24, where it says this, "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands." So ladies, God has given you a clear example of what your love for your husband ought to look like through the church's relationship to Christ. And we're told, right, the church submits to Christ. Let's talk about what that is teaching us, right? I know this is a touchy subject in our day and age. What we see in this passage is that wives are called to be submissive helpers to their husbands. And the idea of submission in our culture causes many people to become extremely uncomfortable. Many claim that submission causes a person to lose their individual identity, that somehow it forces them to be subservient to another person. But that is not the biblical view of submission. I appreciate Pastor John Piper because he has a great definition of submission. Here's how he defines it. Submission is the divine calling of a wife to honor and affirm her husband's leadership and carry it out and help carry it out according to her gifts. I'll say it again because I stumbled over it that time. Submission is the divine calling of a wife to honor and affirm her husband's leadership and help carry it through according to her gifts. Now, ladies, submission is not placing your husband into God's position. Submission is not taking your husband's word as absolute. Submission is not your husband bossing you around. And submission certainly does not mean you should follow your husband into sin if he tries to lead you there. Submission does not mean that you give up your input into the marriage. What submission is, though, is the willful inclining of your will to follow your husband's leadership. Submission is a choice wives have to make. It's a choice to willingly follow the initiative that your husband lays out for the family. And God's plan for submission is revealed as a beautiful thing when the husband is leading the family spiritually, when he's providing and watching over them financially, when he's discipling his family to become more like Christ and pleasing to Christ, and when he's protecting them physically from the dangers that are all around them. And ladies, as you submit to your husband, you as a wife then become a picture of the believer submitting to Christ. And that stands in stark contrast to the society and culture all around us. I want to make sure I remind us that we have talked about this in the past, and we're going to say it again today, that men and women are equal in God's sight. We saw that in Genesis 1 and 2 last week. If we went to Galatians 3:28, we'd see it again there. That God designed men and women as equal in worth, dignity, and value, as image bearers of His. Right? They're designed both to rule over creation and be ambassadors for Jesus. But there are distinctions in their roles. And let's not forget the reason for those distinctions. It's the glory of God. That God made us the way that He made us, with the roles that He gave us, so that we could represent His gospel message and bring Him glory on the earth. If you were to read all the way to the end of Ephesians 5, you would see that Paul connects the relationship of a wife and a husband to the model of the relationship of Christ and the church. It gives us a beautiful understanding that when a marriage is functioning biblically and both parties are doing their part, that marriage is a powerful testimony of the power of the gospel to the watching world. But our culture and the feminist movement wants to deceive us into believing that a woman's worth is determined by what she does. Having a high-profile job, rising up above men, right? Whatever it may be, whatever it is that she's doing, instead of her worth being determined by her Creator, the one who made her. Society puts your worth in your works. God says you're worthy because of who you are and how he made you, your identity. Let's think through some of the practical applications of this role as submissive helper. What does that look like? Well, from the pages of Scripture, here's what we read. We see in Ephesians 5 that wives ought to love and respect their husbands. If we were to flip to Titus chapter 2, which we'll do a little bit later, we'll see that the older ladies are called to mentor or disciple the younger women. If we go back to Ephesians 6, verse 4, we see that wives are called to help their husbands train up their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. That's a joint effort between husband and wife. We also see in the pages of Scripture that ladies are called to utilize their skills, their gifts, their abilities to honor God and help their family. We see that very clearly in the Proverbs 31 woman who's very industrious for the sake of building up her family and caring for her family. So that may mean that you're out in the working world, working in the industry, having a career. Or it may also mean that you are a homemaker. And I just want to encourage you, whichever position you're in, or perhaps you're in both, that you need to recognize the life-impacting importance of managing your home and raising your kids. That is the fulfillment of the Great Commission. Don't undermine the value of that. And don't fall for the lie that one type of work is inherently better than the other. Our culture wants us to believe that working in the industry is more significant than managing a home and raising kids and helping a husband. But frankly, that's based on a lie. Who determines what is valuable or not? And our answer must be God does. He's the one that we will one day stand before and give an account to. And he does not make a distinction between one being more important than the other. Both are important, and neither men nor women are in a better position to do what is valuable to God. Both have great opportunities to serve the Lord and bring him glory just the way that he's designed us. Now, Rebecca Merkel likes to talk about the work of a wife in terms of being a translator. She means that she seeks to understand her husband's direction, his leadership, and then she translates that into a beautiful reality. And here's how she puts it. Listen to this. She says, "So be the glory of your husband. Be the concentrated, intoxicating, incarnate poetry that tells the story of death and resurrection. And then throw yourself into the task of glorifying. Be fruitful, build your house, work hard, be ambitious, be productive, learn more, run harder. Take the gifts that God has given you, the desires he has given you, the constraints he has given you, and then figure out how to weave those into something glorious, something compelling, a beautiful aroma that can't be contained, and that beckons a broken world to come and taste, to see that the Lord is good." There's incredible power in a godly woman using her gifts to beautify and create and cultivate such that it strengthens the gospel in her marriage, in her home, and out in the workplace. Women are incredibly influential. And Peter would recognize this same powerful influence when he penned the following in 1 Peter 3. In 1 Peter 3, 1 through 4, it says, "Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious." What you're hearing is that through the power of her godly lifestyle, a woman can win over the heart of even her cold, rebellious, unbelieving husband. So ladies, do not underestimate the power of your influence. You have incredible influence, and as you live for the Lord, as you conduct yourself in a manner worthy of Christ, it will challenge those around you, especially your husband. So that's the woman as a wife. Now let's move on to another possible role that you may inhabit. We're going to talk about woman as a mother. Woman as a mother. We talked a bit about this last week, but this is a particular role or a calling that's been under attack for quite some time in our society. Our culture has reduced motherhood to this brainless, menial job that no woman should be forced to take and demean themselves by taking. But what our culture doesn't understand is the eternal nature of the little souls that you're investing in. That a mother's influence isn't just for this lifetime, which would already be very significant, but it's also influencing them for the life to come. And there's absolutely no circumstance where motherhood ought to be considered less important to entering the workforce and carving out a career for herself. Now, many ladies enjoy having a job or a career, right? And that's well and good, right? Perhaps you enjoy the challenge of it. You like the reward of the paycheck or of the product you're producing, or perhaps the promotion. That's fine. But do you look at the responsibility of your family with the same level of commitment? Do you view them as a burden or as a stewardship opportunity? Ladies, that's what I'm asking you to wrestle with. And we know that when it comes to being a mother, there's more to it than simply having babies. God desires godly offspring. That's a lifelong investment from a mother towards her children. So as a mother, you are called to lead and to teach your children. So I'm going to take us back now to Deuteronomy 6. And we're going to not only look at the call to love God with all your being, but then pay attention to what comes after that call. In Deuteronomy 6, verse 5, it says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart." Keeps going. It says, you shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Right, the expectation here of God towards his people, women included, is that you're going to be teaching and talking about God's word all the time. When you rise up, as you go about the day, when you're getting ready to settle down for the night, that God's word is being diligently taught to the next generation. And as we said with the men, ladies, you don't just happen or accidentally stumble into diligence. This must be an aim, it's a pursuit, it's a goal that you set forth. If you're going to teach the word in all of life's circumstances, the word has to first be in you. And then it has to be intentionally coming out of you. So ladies, do you have that kind of love for the word? Is it on your heart and mind? How often is it coming out of you? Are you able to help your children or others in your life identify sin and help them not only address the behaviors, but to get beyond that to the heart of why they're doing what they're doing? Can you help them resolve conflict biblically? Or what about this? What if a kid comes to you, or maybe a coworker even, and asks you a big question about God? Are you confident that you can take them to God's word and answer those questions, give them compelling answers? And if your answer would be, I don't know, maybe for some of that I could, but others, I'm not sure. That's okay. I'm glad that you're willing to be humble and teachable. So the thing now to consider is, you got your work cut out for you. Just like the men, right? We have a job before us, and what's the next step that we're going to take this week to address it? So I'm going to recommend resources again, just like I did 2 weeks ago. And they're the same two resources, but get some stuff that's going to pour into you. Shepherding a Child's Heart by Ted Tripp is an excellent parenting resource, and so is For the Love of Discipline by Sarah Wallace. We have both out in the resource center, unless the men already checked them out 2 weeks ago, which I hope they have. I hope they're already digging into that. But there's a whole plethora of other stuff out there too that's very good. Be receiving instruction, be receiving equipping from good resources. For some of you, maybe it's time to get a mentor, get a discipler, someone who's a little further along in life, who you've been able to observe and see that they have done parenting well, that they've been a godly woman, and you can ask them, hey, what did you learn? How did you do this? What can I do in order to model what Christ calls me to? Let someone else pour into you. For some, maybe you need to go home and take some time, get away from the noise of life, and spend some time in prayer, talking to the Lord. Maybe there's things to confess. Maybe it's just crying out, God, I need your help. Lord, I need you to give me the wisdom and the desire to grow in these areas. And certainly for all of us, it'd be wise for us to plan a time to be intentional to take the next step. So when am I going to read this book? When am I going to reach out to that person? When am I going to draw near to the Lord in prayer? How am I going to invest in my children? Make a plan and execute the plan. Now, for the sake of time, we cannot go to Psalm 78, but I want you to write it down on your bulletin. If you're taking notes, write Psalm 78, verses 1 through 8 there. That's another great passage about training up the children to know God and to know His Word, and just reinforces that the point of this is that we as people, and for you ladies, you're called to invest in the next generation, invest in your families, specifically to help them to know the Lord and His Word. That's your calling. So we've heard about woman as a wife, woman as a mother. Now we're going to move out into our broader category, just like we did with the men, woman as a member of society. Woman as a member of society. So this is like the catch-all. You may not ever be in the role of a wife or a mother, but most women are going to be in these other roles that we're going to talk about. So, for example, last week we heard from Genesis 1 and 2 that you are called to be a hard worker. God has designed you to work and rule over His creation and to not be lazy. Right? There's good works that He's prepared in advance for you to do. So a godly woman stays active in the different seasons of life to be a blessing and not a burden to others. Paul warned the church in Thessalonica that if someone was not willing to work, then he or she should not eat. There's no excuse for someone to be idle when there is plenty of work to be done to glorify God and serve others. And as we see in the pages of Scripture, women are builders of families. They're builders of communities, whether it's the church community or physically out in your neighborhood building community. You're builders of life-giving spaces through hospitality. There's so much work available for you. Now, a significant part of your calling as a woman in society is also to be a disciple maker. When Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection is over, one of the last things He does before ascending to heaven is He appears before His disciples, and He gives them what's known as the Great Commission. We see that in Matthew 28, verses 18 through 20, which tells us, "And Jesus came and said to them, 'All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age.'" That commission is for you, ladies. You are being called to go out into the world to make disciples. Jesus Himself is sending you with His authority, and He says you're not alone in it. He's going with you. But you're called to go and tell others about the hope of Christ, the hope that you have, and to instruct them in all that He has commanded us. Paul would later write to his disciple Titus about the calling of older women to disciple the younger. So this is Titus 2, verses 3 through 5 that we mentioned earlier. Here it is on the screen behind us. It says, "Older women likewise are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good, and train the younger women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind, and submissive to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled." So now you're hearing, ladies, that, again, you're called to make disciples, and one of the ways that plays out is if you're an older lady, that you would then turn around and invest in younger ladies, and that you would help them be trained up to be a godly woman in the variety of roles that they may inhabit. And there's a significant reason why. Paul said it, so that the word of God may not be reviled. This is not a meaningless task. There's profound implications for women doing this. If we take the reverse, it begins to become apparent. If women abandon their calling and their roles and they live selfishly, without boundaries, given to immorality, abandoning their homes and rebelling against their husbands, right, would look like the world around us. And that would bring dishonor to God's word. People would look at that and say, I don't want anything to do with Christianity. They're a hot mess. They don't have anything more together than we do. Why would I want to worship their God? So ladies, do you understand the importance of your calling to be a disciple who makes disciples? Do you feel a burden to tell others about Jesus? Have you ever met with another woman to help her grow in her walk with Christ? And who are you doing that with right now? Every Christian woman should have an answer to those questions. And if you're here and you're like, I don't know where to start, I've never had anyone show me how to do that, okay, glad you're here. Let's talk about that. There are resources in our church to help you and to come alongside of you. I would encourage you to start with your small group leader and ask them for help and how you can take the next step of growth in these areas. All right, we have a women's ministry whose theme is Titus chapter 2 this year. Like, go and talk to the women's ministry team. Ask them to help equip you. Or our pastor team. We would love to come alongside of you. That's why God has put us here, to teach and equip. We would love to be a part of that process. Let's keep moving. Let's transition to the next thing here. As members of society, women are also called to promote purity and righteousness. Now, unfortunately, many women indulge in sexual immorality, whether that's virtually or physically. Pornography and sexual licentiousness are real problems in our day, and we talked about this for the men 2 weeks ago, but frankly, it's relevant for the ladies too, because the number of women involved in these continue to increase. Many women have been led astray by their desire for physical pleasure or the allure of intimacy. And while both men and women have responsibility for their conduct, my focus this morning is on you ladies. And women must conduct themselves in purity and righteousness. And I don't want you to take my word for it. Let's take God's word for it. Let's look at 1 Thessalonians 4, 3 and 4, where we hear, for this is the will of God, your sanctification, your ongoing growth in holiness, that you abstain from sexual immorality, that each one of you know how to control his own body in holiness and honor. Biblical womanhood flees temptation and pursues holiness. It treats your own body and the body of others with the dignity and value and worth that they deserve as image bearers of God. And unfortunately, the price of forsaking God in this area is high. Like, the damage that it has done in our society is great, and one of the clearest and most horrific examples of it is abortion. Abortion has become mainstream as a result of consequence-free sex becoming the idol that our nation worships. And 64 million and counting have paid the price for sexual immorality. And I share that because it highlights the necessity for both men and women, godly men and godly women, to rise up and to live differently. For women to refuse to adopt the cultural narrative that pushes for consequence-free sex. For the sanctity of intimacy and marriage to be restored to the one man, one woman for life marriage. For sexual temptation of any type to be fled from, and for counsel to be sought out to help you in fleeing from it. And the beauty of the gospel is that Jesus Christ is the Redeemer for all of these temptations, all of these sins. He helps us pursue him. Well, finally, we see that a godly woman must be zealous for good works. And this ties into the good works that God has created in advance for us to do, which we read about in Ephesians 2, verse 10, Titus chapter 2, verse 14. If you read Titus, Paul repeats this call to good works many times. In fact, he ends the letter with this particular admonition in Titus 3:14. He says, let our people learn to devote themselves to good works so as to help cases of urgent need and not be unfruitful. So ladies, you are called to be devoted to good works, to have a sincere desire to come alongside others and help them in their time of need. And if we have eyes to see, right, there are hurting people within our church community and certainly outside the body of Christ. There are many people who are hurting in our world, in our communities. People all around you who need help. And we know that throughout the scriptures, there's the call to care for the orphan, the widow, and the poor. The question is, are you as a woman thinking about those calls? Do you think in any particular day about your call to care for those who are in need, who are around you? That your job is not complete when your family has a roof over their head and food on the table. Those are good things. Praise God for that. But there are still many around you who are hurting and suffering, who need help. Turn your attention outwards and look to them. And that's a real challenge. That's a burden. I mean, there's a lot of brokenness in our world. There are so many people that need help, more than we could possibly help. But God's not calling you to help all of them. He's calling you to help the ones He's put in your sphere of influence. What does it look like for you to take the next step in caring for those who cannot care for themselves? I want to challenge you, ladies, to be on the lookout for opportunities to demonstrate steadfast love and loyalty to others. For the sake of time, we have to keep moving. I know it's a lot to consider. Here's our next opportunity to embrace the beauty of God's plan for women. It's to rule over creation. Rule over creation. We discussed this last week in depth from the book of Genesis. God made you as women to rule or have dominion over creation. So for the sake of time, we're not going to get into the same level of detail today, but there are some spheres of this that I want to reiterate about God's plan for you as ladies. Several of them we've already hit on today. How about this? Woman as a helping being. God has designed you to be a helper. Or you rule over creation as a ruler, woman as a ruler or authority. God has delegated that to you, that you would have dominion over the earth. Or how about woman as a provider? Again, thinking of the Proverbs 31 woman. See, it pleases the Lord when you use your time, talents, and treasure that He gave you, by the way, to effectively care for and cultivate this earth, the people, the things that He's entrusted to you. And ideally, as you're cultivating and caring for what you've been entrusted with, right, the world's going to be a better place. Society is going to be built up. People will be challenged to pursue righteousness, and God will be glorified. Again, I want to share some helpful words of insight from Rebecca Merkel. She puts it this way: it's good for us to go through this again. If God is good, and if He wants us to subdue this planet, and if He wants us to obey the Great Commission and conquer this world for Christ, and if He tells half the human race that they're in charge of tending the home, it follows from this that the home is actually one of the most strategic and important tools by which the world will be won. We should not read that command as God telling the women to get out of the way and make room for the important stuff. He's telling them to get out there on the front lines. The home clearly matters, and it matters a lot. And why is that? The home is the beating heart that powers everything else. The home nurtures, feeds, provides rest, gives shelter, and creates a loyalty to itself that is one of the strongest and most compelling of all human emotions. Home is where your people are, and all of your deepest loves and allegiances are wrapped up in it. Or at least they can be. Home can also be a place of bitterness, heartache, betrayal, and hatred. A place of emptiness and loneliness. A place where things are taken, not given. A place that creates a gaping wound in the souls of those who belong to it. It can weave together or it can shatter. And the person at home is the woman. Whatever else you may say about it, it's not an irrelevant position to hold. Ladies, your rule over creation matters. It's of the utmost importance. You have incredible influence, incredible opportunities to rule and have dominion. I want to encourage you to embrace it. With those three components of this plan before us, now we arrive at our final point that we're called to embrace, which is recognize Jesus as the fulfillment of God's plan for women. Recognize Jesus as the fulfillment of God's plan for women. You see, Jesus not only commanded us to love God and love our neighbor, but then he got busy showing us how to do it, right? By his own life and by his own ministry. He perfectly loved the Father. He always did what was pleasing to him, and he perfectly loved his neighbors. We see in the gospel accounts Jesus spending his time with the poor and the outcasts of society, the people that no one else wanted to be with. We see Jesus loving those who hated him. He washed the feet of Judas the betrayer. He humbled himself and died on the cross for sinners like me who weren't seeking him. Right? There's no one more qualified to hold women to this standard than Jesus. He lived it with every fiber of his being, which is why he could challenge his disciples with this in John 15, verses 12 and 13. He says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends." And that's exactly what Jesus did. He was the sacrificial servant leader who died on our behalf so that many could be rescued and redeemed. And that's the example that he's calling you to, ladies, to lay down your life for the good of many. So I want to call you this morning to follow Christ. And we see that not only did he love his heavenly Father and love his neighbors perfectly, Jesus is also the one who perfectly ruled over creation. Right? He speaks, and the wind and the waves die down. He prays, and the loaves are multiplied. He touches the leper or the blind, and they're healed. And that's not to say that you're going to repeat those kind of miracles, but rather to say that he is the perfect one that we look to. He is the fulfillment. He's what you're called to be like. That's why you're called to be conformed to his image. So ladies, as you fix your eyes on Christ and as you pursue him, he will refine you. He will smooth away the rough edges of your sinfulness, and he will replace it with his holiness. I'll close with these words from 2 Corinthians 3:18, which says, "And we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit." God will do a work of transformation in you as you fix your eyes on him and run the race after him. Let's pray.